Landing your first tech job can be challenging. Do you need a degree? Should you attend a code school? How much of this interview will actually matter if I land the job? A lot of different people will give you very different advice in response to those questions. Today's guest is Ethan Miller, a software engineer that just recently landed his first dev job. Ethan's going to talk to us about what worked for him and what that process looked like. Thanks for joining us today, Ethan.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brad. It's great to be here.
I'm glad that you're here as well. Let's start by talking about your journey into software. What motivated you to get into software development?
Well, honestly, it was a variety of factors. I have been around computers my whole life, more kind of Frankensteining, putting them together from a young age with my dad and everything. He worked in a lot of IT-related areas. So we always had like a stockpile of laptops and old desktop towers to mess around with. I always thought they were really interesting. There are, pictures of me using computers when I was in diapers, and that's just 3 weeks ago. So I've been around them quite a bit. But yeah, I find it really interesting. I find the logic fascinating. I think it's incredible what you can do, especially now with how fast technology is advancing. What is it? Moore's law, the whole you can double the number of superconductors every year, that whole idea, and how we can somewhat see maybe an end to that without further giant advancements in things like quantum computing, for instance, which I'm also very, very interested in. Regardless, getting back to your original question, I have, always just wanted to explore it. I think it's something that I find very fascinating just in general. I find that the logic makes a lot of sense to me. I've always heard that it takes a certain kind of person to be able to understand it a certain way, and it takes a certain kind of person to understand a lot of things in the world. But software development is definitely one of those areas that, yeah, it's like an on-off switch, is kind of my understanding of it, at least with how far into the industry I am or am not at this point. So I feel really fortunate to be able to have that interest in it. But also, again, the things you can make with code are just incredible, and I find that itself very fascinating. I love the idea of continuously challenging myself, making new projects, and pushing my limits on a daily basis. I'm not going to lie and say money is not a factor. I also really wanted to get into development for the administrative reason of wanting to eventually be able to travel while I work. I don't really have a dream job so much as a dream life position, and I would love to be able to just roam around. There's a lot of different things that really kind of spurred me towards it. Plus, my great network of software developer friends, yourself included, who all helped push me towards it, whether inadvertently or on purpose over time. I did the whole let's try learning Python today, and then stop doing it 2 days later, and then pick it up a couple months afterwards. Say, oh, that was whoops, let's try again. And then that happens and happens and happens until you finally say, okay, I'm going to stick with this. And I did, and now here I am.
Yeah, so it sounds like you were interested in tech long before you had the idea of maybe I could write this software or build something.
Oh yeah, definitely. I didn't actually even think about coding as a career idea for quite a long time. Computers were just something that I really liked to use and thought were interesting from a young age. And it was during college when I was like, maybe software development could be a thing that I do.
So you mentioned your first dev job. You're in Indianapolis.
That is correct.
And the company you're working for is kind of like consulting / like a like code shop, right?
Yeah, it's a consulting firm, and there are a variety of teams working on a variety of different projects. Right now, I'm on the front end team for a project that deals with a web app that we're building for the U.S. Navy, which I think is very cool.
That is really cool. Having like high profile clients like that always feels good. And I actually started at a consulting firm, an agency, whatever you want to call it. A lot of times I miss that. Like there was one of the really cool things about that type of work was every couple weeks I had the option to work on a new project.
Oh, really?
And I probably worked with more programming languages at that job than any other job in particular, like iOS, well, Objective-C, Java, PHP, JavaScript, just a plethora of things.
That's kind of funny. I'm actually somewhat in the opposite kind of boat. I don't really interact with that many different languages on a regular basis. But also, I am in this early on position, and I am on this team specifically. I was hired on to this particular team that is just doing this one big project. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure of all the different nuances in the world of it yet, but I'm confident that as I go on, I'll understand more and more of it, which is the goal always. But yeah, so that is very interesting though. To be on multiple projects, just kind of, it sounds like, not at a whim, but with frequency, enough frequency for it to be a thing.
Yeah, I would say that a lot of the work that we did was not with any like super high profile clients. Like a lot of them just needed a redesign of their website or a new
Hmm.
website that did some basic stuff, like
Oh, okay,
nothing crazy or like long term contracts. Although we did have some.
I gotcha. Okay, yeah, that definitely makes sense. Cool, very cool.
So just out of curiosity, you said you're doing front end stuff. What does the technology look like that you're using?
I work primarily in React. That is, well, I'm a JavaScript developer. I work in React, and we use TypeScript as well. My particular position is unit testing, right? So, which is actually something I've never done before. So this entire thing not only has been, a process of getting more and more comfortable with React in general, but also, day one I had to start learning TypeScript. Day one I started having to learn Jest as well, and figuring out things like React Test Library, and so yeah, I had to jump in pretty quick on that. But really, the bulk of what I do is React. I don't even do that much TypeScript yet because I'm focusing on testing. I don't develop in TypeScript. I kind of just have to understand it and make it play nice, I guess is a better way of putting it. I've learned what things like type interfaces are and such, but um, those are the guys who are actually writing it. I'm just making it work in that other kind of way, I suppose.
So do you write your tests in TypeScript or JavaScript?
I write my tests in JavaScript.
That's interesting. I feel like you're definitely not the only person I know that does that. A lot of people really like the flexibility of JavaScript when it comes to testing, but really prefer the rigidness of TypeScript when it comes to building a production application.
Yeah, no, definitely, and that's again kind of, maybe I was misspeaking on that a little bit. It's not that I don't write them in TypeScript, it's that I primarily write them in JavaScript, but there are still elements of TypeScript in there. They're just not strictly written. I don't sit down at the code editor and I say, I'm going to write this test completely in TypeScript. It's just kind of, it's JavaScript with TypeScript sprinkled in there wherever it needs to be so that it talks nice to the code.
Okay, and I think I've put the horse before the cart a little bit here. So, TypeScript, for anyone listening that's unaware, is a superset of the JavaScript language that adds like a rich type system, as well as some other small features to the language. React is a front end library framework, maybe. Library is probably the appropriate term. It's built by Facebook. It's extremely popular. It allows you to write a language called JSX, which is like HTML built into your JavaScript. And then finally, Ethan mentioned Jest. Jest is a testing framework, also written by Facebook and maintained by them, that I think was originally built for testing React components, but it can be used for just about anything JavaScript or
Hmm.
TypeScript related at this point.
Yeah, it's kind of funny with Jest. In my in my travels, let's say, I've found a lot of historical forums. I say historical forums, I mean like 2016, 17, about Jest, and when it was still in its much earlier stages, people actually really did not care for Jest. It was slow and sluggish and just kind of awkward to use, despite its whole like its whole slogan is something along the lines of like delightful unit testing or something, because it has this zero configuration ideology, which is good, not entirely true. But my understanding is that Jest now, like most software frameworks, is a lot nicer than it used to be. So thumbs up for Jest. Jest is nice.
So to get to your current position, you went through a boot camp called Code Louisville. What was that like?
That was an interesting experience. I definitely lucked out because I was able to be a part of it when it was still at no cost, as they were grant funded. It was a really fun experience. I think that the setup of it was not exactly what I expected, but it still turned out to be really, really, core helpful for what I'm doing now. I don't think I would even be near this position I'm in now without having done that because I didn't go to school for computer science. I don't have the degree. I don't have any real actual certification like that beyond the boot camp uh, completion certifications. So I would say, yeah, the boot camp was definitely really helpful. As far as it itself and the kind of experience it was a 12-week program, and I did it 3 times. Um, and the first one you do is front end, right? So your HTML, CSS, and basic JavaScript. And I thought that was really interesting. My understanding is that that's kind of a good place to start because HTML is like code flavored, but it's not. It's Markdown. It's not coding. I'm giving you some air quotes right now. Um, and then CSS is CSS, and JavaScript is that was actually my favorite part. In fact, during my nights, I had Wednesday nights. You could do Monday through Friday. They had 5 different classes going all at the same time. I had Wednesday nights, and at the very end of the first session, they were going around the room, and we were doing like end of the session icebreaker style. Say your name and what you'd worked on, and we went all the way around the whole room. It wasn't like stand up. We did stand up separately. It was like a big, getting to know everyone on your dorm floor, you know, kind of thing. And it's kind of funny. Out of, I don't even remember how many people were in there, 50 or 60 maybe. There were quite a few. It was me and one other guy who specifically, when we were asked what our favorite part was, we both said JavaScript. Everyone else was like, "Oh yeah, I loved the CSS or I loved the HTML because it just made a lot of sense to me," which is cool. But I thought it was really kind of funny. I really enjoyed being able to get in there and actually make things happen. Um, so I kind of ran with that in figuring out the direction that I wanted to pursue coding in. Because if you want to stick with HTML and CSS, there's some kind of market for that, definitely. But I really liked the actual functionality of it. The classes were set up in such a way that it was like a 2-hour, once a week thing. And it wasn't really a class, like a lecture, so much as most of the time, so much as it was there were like 3 or 4 mentors there at any given time, and you kind of sit and work on your stuff. We were all given access to video courses on the website Treehouse, which is I really like the way that website's put together. It's really cool. Unfortunately, I don't think my my Code Louisville subscription is active for that anymore. But it is nice if you're looking for anyone's looking for a nice, easy to use resource. Treehouse is definitely a good place to start. I've also heard really good things about Egghead.io, for instance, but I haven't gotten into that one quite as much myself yet. So they would assign us these video tracks that we would have to complete, and on our own time. It was like 30 something, almost 40 hours of videos that we had to watch within the 12 weeks. And then there was also a capstone project, which brought it all together. And it was pass fail. You had to meet certain requirements. Do you have these features? Does it have responsive design? Did you design it mobile first? XYZ. It's just like a school project. It's exactly what it was. It was a school project. It was pass fail. Again, you do this. We'll pass you. If you don't, you fail. But it was great to have you in the class. So fortunately, my project passed, and then I said that was really cool. Let's do more. Let's go deep dive, right? Because when you start Code Louisville, their whole setup. I don't know how this compares to other boot camps, to be perfectly honest with you. But the way theirs works is that you do front end first, because that's your dipping your toes into the water kind of experience. And then you can choose from a variety of different languages. Like they had a C# class, they actually had a Salesforce class too, which I thought was interesting. They had a Python SQL class, like a combination Python and SQL class, which I took, and then they also had a JavaScript Intro to React class, which I also took, and a couple others. They had a Java class as well, which I avoided like the plague. just to be real, Java was actually my first foray into coding for real. I took a Java class after I graduated college. I decided to go back to maybe get a computer science degree to see if it would, because that was the way I thought you had to do it. Not had to, but that was the best, or the easiest, most streamlined way to do it. That was my impression. So I took this class, and it turns out it was a Java class, and object-oriented programming is really, really cool, but I don't know if it's as much my thing, unless I need to use it, in which case I'll learn it, right? So, but I really like JavaScript, and I really, really like React. I think that it's so cool how modular everything can be, and how free form JavaScript kind of is. But so I did the first 12-week class, did the capstone project, completed all the videos, and then I decided, what would be great? Being masochistic. So I took, there's a month gap in between their sessions. So it's 3 months on, 1 month off. And for the next 3 months, I took 2 courses at the same time. So I was doing Python, SQL, and JavaScript React, right? So it was like double the workload, but it was super rewarding, and I loved the challenge of it. And now that I have those 3 certifications, I actually started looking for jobs before I even finished those other 2 classes, and which I think was probably really beneficial for me to see just, what it takes to get one of those positions. I did get a couple interviews before my current position that obviously I didn't make the cut for those, but it felt really good to be able to get responses and interviews, and not just get flat out rejected, which I did many times, which is part of it. It's fine. You just have to keep pressing on, right? And I knew the position I was in. I knew the lack of experience that I was dealing with, so you just have to keep making projects, pushing forward. But as far as Code Louisville goes, those certifications were definitely helpful. So to anyone, to any listener who is considering maybe getting into coding and using a boot camp as a primary resource, totally a viable thing. 100% a viable thing.
Yeah, I have 3 points, and we'll take a quick break based off of the stuff that you just said. So, first point, I dropped out of college before we got into any of the really complex computer science stuff. I barely use any of that on my day to day, but I found myself in a spot where I felt like I needed to learn that stuff. So I bought a textbook, and like a $120 textbook, not like a $20 pragmatic programmer. Like, this is how you get started with JavaScript.
Mhm.
Like a this is how operating systems are built type book.
Yeah.
Actually, it was the compiler. The Dragon book is the one that I bought, in addition to Structure and Interpretation of Computer Programs, the SICP book. And I studied those. At home in San Francisco in my apartment. I just flipped through the books, tried to make a couple pages each night, and made that happen. The second thing that you mentioned that caught my attention was you liking JavaScript, but other people liking CSS and HTML. I feel like it's interesting what people consider to be successful. So I've always viewed HTML as make it exist. Like, without HTML, the content doesn't exist on the page. And then CSS is make it presentable. And then, like you said, JavaScript is make it happen, like make it do stuff. And then the final thing was you mentioned Salesforce for a code boot camp. Just to give the listeners some insight into why that was a thing at Code Louisville. Most certainly, I didn't build the programs. I'm not 100% sure. Was so in the Midwest where Ethan and I are located, there are quite a few Salesforce dev jobs. So I think Code Louisville was taking a very practical approach and saying, like, specifically in the Louisville, Kentucky area, there are a lot of C# and Salesforce jobs. So they were saying, hey, we can help you find a Salesforce job if you take our course.
Oh, absolutely. And I do also have the your question slated pulled up for finding a job through the boot camp. Just before we take that break real quick, while we're on this topic, I would like to briefly throw this out there. as far as the boot camp goes, they absolutely were. Sorry, they were absolutely integral to finding a job. In fact, this is my first dev job that I'm in now, but it's not my first tech job, which I got by way of the boot camp. You know, what happens is when you complete the first one, the first boot camp, they put you on a list that recruiters just are constantly pruning and going through and checking out and seeing who might be a good fit for X place, you know. And so I would say that, yeah, the boot camp, again, I can't speak for other boot camps and their programs, but I would imagine they're at least similarly structured. Eventually, you know, I got connected with a particular recruiter who helped me land a tech support job as a contractor. And, you know, and then this opportunity came along and I had to take it because I couldn't not. Despite all the other factors, you know, the work that I genuinely, you know, did put into it, the effort and everything, I will say that I don't know if I would be in the same position now without the boot camp simply because of their help in getting me a job. So, as far as that support goes, it's absolutely there. These people want you to succeed, or they wouldn't be doing what they're doing, right? So it's really nice to know that you have this entire network behind you as long as you are willing to put in what it requires.
Yeah, success really benefits both parties in that scenario. You get a job, and then they have a success story that helps bring more people into their boot camp.
Absolutely, and that is a huge reason they did it too. You know, they have some great number of people who graduated their program, and they use that as one of their selling points. Win-win situation, right?
Definitely. So we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back in just a few moments to talk about, I guess, exiting the boot camp and if you felt fully prepared for what you were doing, and then kind of some of the projects you worked on before you're like actually landing your first dev job.
Sure, sounds
So
great.
we'll be back for that in just a moment. Hi, and welcome back to the Design Doc podcast. In our last segment, we talked with Ethan Miller about his experience with the Code Louisville boot camp, and we're going to pick right back up with exiting the boot camp and what that process looked like. So I'm curious, Ethan, now that you've landed your first dev job, when you found yourself in that position, did you feel like you were unprepared for anything after exiting the boot camp? Is there something they could have taught you that maybe wasn't covered very well?
Well, to hit your first point, I felt absolutely unprepared. It's like I knew I had these skills. I knew I had put the work into developing, no pun intended, them to the degree that I had, and yet I still felt like I had no idea what I was doing. I definitely felt imposter syndrome creep in all the time, and by creep in, I mean tidal wave in. I'm not. I feel like I'm a pretty good interviewer in job interviews. You know, I feel like I present myself to a really personable degree and everything. And the interviews themselves don't make me nervous. What also made me nervous though was the idea that okay, if I do get a job, I mean, then what? You know, obviously, you know, you keep learning and everything, and you adapt to your environment. But there's that still that underlying whole like, even if I get a job, what do I do? Are they going to know? You know, my first whole month working at this at this new dev job, I was so worried the whole time. I was like, when are they going to find out that I'm just three gnomes in a trench coat? You know, and it's really kind of it's a scary thing because you're surrounded by all these, you know, really brilliant people who have been in the industry for 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years or more, and it's like this is just so normalized for them. It's really helpful because again, like the bootcamp people, my team, you know, we all want to be successful, and that mandates helping others be successful in the ways that are necessary. So it's really easy to fall into the trap of if I ask questions, I'm going to look stupid, or if I ask questions, I'm going to look like I don't deserve to be in this position. Yeah, it's definitely something that I was worried about a lot. I actually had my 30-day the other day with my senior dev team lead, And it was really nice because I told them basically all of what I just said to you. I said that I've been so worried that I'm not actually contributing to the team because I do have output, but it takes, longer than everyone else. And he said, no, that's normal. We hired you on knowing that there's going to be that. We hire everyone we hire on. We know there's going to be that adjustment period, and getting you up to speed and allowing this to really sink in, and have you become a fully fledged part of it. And it was really reassuring in so many ways. Yeah, so I definitely felt unprepared, not on the part of the boot camp. They did what they did beautifully, and it's definitely more of like an internalized fear, though. I don't think, was I really underprepared? Probably not. That being said, luck is a factor in getting your first development job for sure. You've got to have a company that's willing to take a chance on you, unless they're specifically looking for people. And there were a lot of these. There were a lot of companies, in Louisville who hired Code Louisville grads because they wanted that fresh, new talent, right? And I did apply for a few of those, and I got rejected. But some people did get the jobs, and it's really great for them. So I guess it really just depends on what direction you wind up figuring out you want to go. So code wise, it's the same. It's the same exact thing. I walked out of there and I was like, neat. I have my capstone project for each of these classes I did one. So I had 3 capstone projects. What else? Admittedly, my portfolio is kind of small, but it's really that comes down to just how you present it. And I think it's really good to be able to have an informed conversation with someone, with an interviewer, about it. Like if you make a project for the hell of it, and you have no idea how it works. Like if you make a project and you wait 3 months and you look at it again and you're like, how does this work? Why does this work? I forgot all about it. That's not good. Even if it's like a small project, as long as you're able to talk through the logic and indicate that you are aware of what's happening, I think that's a lot better than having a big project that you have no idea about,
Yeah, so I have 3 thoughts, yet again, based off of the stuff you just said. So I'm going to backtrack quite a bit
Sure.
and go through those really quick. So the first one is the imposter syndrome. That doesn't really go away unless you are extremely confident. So if anyone else feels that way, you're not alone, but you very likely will feel that way for the rest of your career. I've been doing development for 8 years now. That sounds right. And it still feels that way. In fact, the second point I was going to mention is your 30-day is a 30-day review. I have a weekly one-on-one with my manager, and almost every single week, I'm like, "Hey, am I doing enough? Are we good?" Just to check, because I like it's still really easy to feel like, man, I am not the right person for this, or I shouldn't be here.
Yeah, no, that specifically is one of the things that I felt. I was my biggest question to myself always. It wasn't just the imposter syndrome. It was like, why did they pick me? Why did they hire me, a junior dev? Because a couple weeks after they hired me, they hired a mid-level developer, right? And so my whole thing was like, why would they hire me when they could hire this guy who does know a lot more about what he's doing? Why? But I guess that was their business need. I did also in my 30-day review find out that I am not, because it took me long enough to, it took me a while to feel comfortable in the setting just on my own, to the point where I started, opening up to my coworkers a little more and actually having conversations with them in general about non-work stuff. But I found out that I am one of 3 junior developers on my team. So again, like what you were saying, in a similar way, it's all about communication. Whether there's communication of expectations, just general communication with your team. That's like the most important thing, for sure. That's the most important thing I think in any interpersonal relationship is open, honest communication. Because without communication in its in a proper setting, then everyone is just going to walk around with these misunderstood ideas about how each other feels about the other, and the expectations are going to be totally off between the two or more parties, and it's just a whole big mess. So communication is the most important thing, I think, definitely. But sorry to hijack your second point there.
Yeah, just to add to that, a lot of things people like as a junior dev, that question of like why me, it might not be so much you. This is something that like a lot of people don't seem to think about, but has become a pretty relevant topic for a lot of the places or a couple of the places I've worked over the past few years. But the idea of like, how do I grow as a mentor? And if you have people that don't need mentoring, it's harder to grow as a mentor. So being willing to bring on a junior dev might not be just for you, or like the fact that generally junior devs are slightly cheaper and like all those extra benefits for the company as well. But for someone that's looking to grow as a senior engineer or like an architect or a team lead or something, like they might need people that they can grow for their job. And then finally the third point was, speaking of mentoring, one of the guys I mentored at my last job would frequently say, "I just feel like everyone else knows so much more than I do." And I tried to draw out like some charts and graphs and stuff as I do. And I'm not sure if I communicated the point very clearly, but what I was trying to get at was, even if someone only knows a little bit more than you, it will always seem like they know so much more than you. So just being slightly ahead in terms of knowledge, I don't even want to say ahead because that makes it sound like it's a competition, but having slightly more knowledge on a subject than someone else will make it seem like they know so much more.
It's got this whole imposing, almost kind of ominous like feeling to it. It's like, oh God, they can do all these things, and here I am, like, yeah, I can do this, whatever, But it's like, oh, I can do this. But no one's like that. That's the fears that they are, but no one is. Everyone's in a healthy, work environment. Everyone's helpful.
My
Yeah.
team focuses a lot on growth, which I feel like is a very good way to look at things. Like, are people learning new things? Are they growing? Are they getting more confident? Can we trust them with more meaningful work?
Mhm. Absolutely.
So you mentioned your portfolio, and you had 3 capstone projects under your belt.
Yes.
So maybe let's talk a little bit about what those entailed, and then any other projects you've worked on before landing your first job.
Let's just start with the very first one. So for the front end class, well, the idea was that we were supposed to build a web page, right? So we were supposed to write out the HTML, write our own CSS, our own custom CSS, and it had to have a particular amount of JavaScript functions that worked. And we actually learned jQuery. I learned jQuery before I ever learned React, for sure. It's funny because I haven't actually used jQuery since that project. It was the first and only time I've ever used it. But my project, it was like the page could be whatever you wanted. There was one guy, I think, who did like a funny poem generator, right? And there was one guy who made like a travel page for himself, and there was someone, I don't know, it was really, really um, open-ended, right? So I decided to mock up a front-end web page design for something that I, at least definitely in the future, want to build out more, which is like a kind of like a to-do list sort of website. You may remember my the media tracker website. So which the idea is that you make an account, you pick the categories of things that you want to look at in pop culture or consumer media, like movies. You got a movie category, you can go through, link to some API or a database somewhere or something, and you can populate your list with movies you've seen, movies you want to watch, and you can rank them against each other and things like that. And I drew a lot of inspiration from other websites like Flickchart and My Anime List, for instance, and IMDb, of course. But it's that kind of thing. And I said, okay, well, obviously the multi-page functionality doesn't have to be there, but I made the homepage for it, right? So my homepage wound up consisting of a logo that I found with that I made with just some cool, featurey-looking typeface. I made some icons that served as buttons you can click. I made a random quote generator on the page, and I made a button where in a form field with a button where you can type in the name of a category and you submit it, and a button box icon thing appears on the screen with the name of that category in it. Super simple, especially looking back on it. But it was hard. It was really hard because I was just learning the basics of all these skills, and to have to throw them together, it was hard. Um, a lot of it, didn't make sense. How like the file tree was structured and everything, and what all exactly affects what else, and why is this part here? What's the necessity of this thing? Because it's a lot of information at once that you're essentially being blasted with for the first time. But I made it work, and eventually I want to build that project for real. But I used all kinds of cool stuff on that. I still use the random, I use the random quote generator function for other projects, because it works. Why build it again, right? And it's about as clean as I'm going to get it to my degree of knowledge now. Could I concatenate it a little more? Well, maybe that's the wrong word for it. Could I clean it up a little more and refactor it and make it even cleaner? Sure, probably. But I was really proud of it. I made it work. I even had this little jQuery animation where the page would slide up and down to to hide the random quote that was generated. But it was the whole thing was a great exercise in responsive mobile first design, and just being able to incorporate JavaScript functionality into things, writing CSS, understanding how that works, and linking all these things together, knowing how they affect each other. Even from like a logistical, where do they exist on the computer standpoint. It was really cool to see something that I made appear in a browser. It was really satisfying to make it work, to look at it and say, and be frustrated with it for so long, but that finally it just clicks and the thing does what you need it to do. And it's like, oh, I did this, I made this, So that first project was a big part of me wanting to continue, because it wasn't just being frustrated and slamming my head into a keyboard trying to learn all these things. It was that, but then I finally made it do something. And so I was like, well, if I can do this, there's no, I can do whatever, right? So for the Python class, that one was a little different. So I want to talk about the JavaScript React one first, if that's okay. So the JavaScript React one, I made, I believe, a word game, right? So in my spare time between class sessions to prepare myself for the Python course, I made a word game in Python that's literally just Hangman, right? So I made Hangman in Python, and it was really cool, and I had a lot of help from you and some other software developer friends of mine. I made that work, and it runs in a shell, and it's awesome, and it's cool, and I still have it, and it's nice. So as a personal challenge, I decided to rewrite that game in React, and which completely changed the logic. That was a whole experience. It was a very, very cool experience, though. So that one is a little more straightforward, right? But as a matter of fact, no, I'm wrong on that. That's not what I used for my capstone project. My bad. For the capstone project, it was because it was JavaScript. That's right. I'm sorry. Because it was JavaScript React, it was very similar to the front end class capstone, where you had to make a page for something. Only this one, you had more rules that said, well, you have to do this React thing, and this other React thing, and make it work. And I was like, okay, I can do this. So that's right. We had to pull from API endpoints. So which you helped me figure out and help me write the code for, and figure out how that all worked together. Right. So that was it was dad jokes, cats, and podcasts. And I had multiple pages, and I was allowed to use Bootstrap for this one, so I slapped that on there immediately because I'm not a CSS person. It's not that I don't like design. I find it very interesting. It was my least favorite part. So I used Bootstrap, and I had multiple pages, one of which pulled from an API that created random dad jokes, right? Just little silly puns or whatever. I had one that pulled up pictures of cats from an API that was literally just images of cats. And I used your Porios, I believe it was called, and um, made a third page that pulled up information about podcasts from a database, and that was the capstone for that.
How did you find those APIs?
I don't exactly remember like perfectly exactly how I found the APIs. I think I just kind of Googled around. I was like, what do I want to use for my APIs? I figured, okay, well, I got to make one that pulls up pictures of cats. So I think I literally just Googled cat image API or something, and I found one that was free and didn't super bottleneck your requests or anything. And I was like, okay, well, I'm just using it for a project, so I don't need to make 1,000 requests to the thing. And I just looked around. Honestly, that's the best way I can say it, is that I just plain looked around.
Yeah, if you find yourself looking for APIs in the future, there's I guess a company that I started using a while back called Rapid API. They actually, I used them when they were, I think Mashape was the name. But I think Mashape got bought by Rapid API or something.
Right.
Somehow they've joined forces. But it basically is just like a massive database of APIs. And instead of hitting the API directly, you hit Rapid API as like a proxy. It's really cool. Also, one of the benefits there is if you ever build an API and you want to charge people to hit it, like you can integrate with Rapid API and list it in their database.
It's funny now that you mentioned that. I do still get emails from Rapid API because in my travels, I did come across Rapid API, and I do believe I used them for at least one of those. So yes, I guess now that you have jogged my memory with it, it's been so many moons ago at this point. Yes, Rapid API is an incredible resource for that. Absolutely. But yeah, so that was the second project, and then the third one. And honestly, even though I love JavaScript and I love React, despite that, the Python one was actually my favorite one because it was so unique compared to the others. Right? The others were just like, make a web page and do some stuff. Make the web page do some stuff. And but this one was interesting in that I had to use Jupyter Notebooks for the first time, which is a utility that allows you to cell by cell run Python and SQL script. Right? Very interesting, and you can incorporate all kinds of different packages and libraries in there. So I did something that pulled from a database from my anime list, I believe, and I did a bunch of math and stats using Python and SQL queries to derive some data and conclusions, like what are people's favorites, based on this huge database that I just exported and re-imported as a CSV file. I figured out, like, based on average user rating of like hundreds of thousands of people, like what are people's favorite in this category versus what are people's favorite in this category, and I compared those, and I did some science and scientific method stuff with them and drew my conclusions and everything. But that one I think was my favorite just because of how unique the technology was, and it was honestly the biggest challenge I think for me, and that was it was very cool. But there's not a whole lot else I would say to that one. Besides that, it was more of a math and stats thing.
That sounds really cool. I haven't done much with Jupyter Notebooks. I know that you don't have to use Python. I know it supports a lot of other languages. So if anyone's interested, you can write Go, JavaScript, probably a bunch of other ones as well.
It's really cool. Visually, you can drag and rearrange cells and in whatever order and run them one at a time, run them a few at a time. It's like you don't have to execute the entire program at once. You can see how individual pieces function on their own and then pop those back in the context of the entire thing. It's very cool.
So we're going to take another quick break, and then we'll be back to talk about how you continue learning, making the career switch into development, any tips you have for that, and then just a couple other questions as we wrap up.
Sounds great.
Be right back. Hey, thanks for sticking in through the break. We're back with the Design Doc podcast and with Ethan Miller talking about landing his first dev job. So, Ethan, we're just going to jump straight back into it.
Sounds good.
Um, we just finished talking about some of the projects that you built and how you felt exiting the bootcamp program.
Mhm.
I'm curious, if you continue learning about technology, how do you do that? Do you use blogs, websites, video courses, podcasts, anything like that?
Everything, all of them. I don't listen to podcasts myself so much because I'm more of a music in the car kind of guy. But there are a lot of extremely useful podcasts out there. Video courses are also a great way to go about things. I am a huge fan of just looking stuff up on YouTube that is either relevant to what you're building or generally interesting, right? So, which is where I've learned a lot of what I've learned. Blogs and websites, as far as those go, I can't think of any specific ones off the top of my head. I will look at 10, 15, 20 different websites for one particular issue and just see how they go about solving it in different ways. Look at multiple resources, look at multiple blogs, look at multiple websites, video courses, podcasts, anything, any books, even anything you can get your hands on. As I think it's really less about the particular resource that you're using, versus having that having that eagerness and that desire to sponge as much information as you can.
Cool. That's great advice. Speaking of advice, do you have any tips for people that are considering making a career switch into software?
You will get out what you put in, right? So if you kind of here and there make some projects, then unless you get super lucky, the response from whatever is going to be kind of here or there. But if you really, even if you don't make a whole lot of projects, as long as you are continuing to learn and you have that flame, right? It's really important to stay hungry. I think it's really important to stay interested. And this, I think, this is just applicable to a lot of other areas as well that aren't even software development or technology for that matter. But if you want to make that career switch in development, just know that there are people who know more than you. But that's true of anything, right? There will always be people who know more than you. There will always be people who know less than you. So you have to be comfortable.
Yeah, don't look at it as a form of intimidation. Look at it as like that's a library that's of knowledge just waiting to be tapped.
Absolutely. It's literally sitting there, and developers are always happy to talk about developing. Artists are always happy to talk about art. People who love what they do are always happy to talk about it and share that knowledge. And if they're not, then they're as far as I've been made aware so far, kind of an abnormality, an outlier. And B, the person standing next to them will be more than happy to help you. So there is always more information to be had. And even the people who have been doing it for 30 years are still learning every day. And that's just the way, life kind of works. You're constantly learning things, and software development is far and away no exception. So if you want those challenges, then it's definitely a great field to pursue.
The software landscape changes so frequently that it is like a pretty large effort to stay up to date. So communicating and sharing information and knowledge is a really great way to do that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And developers are always more than happy to do so.
If I completed a boot camp and am struggling to find a job, do you have any advice for me?
I do. It is be persistent. I know how easy it is firsthand now to get discouraged. There were a lot of interviews that I had that I made it past the phone screen, where I was there in person, talking about my projects, discussing salary, discussing what I'm able to do, what they need out of an employee, out of a developer, and we were getting to those points where it's like, okay, you're one of the candidates, right? And I still wouldn't get the job for whatever reason, maybe lack of experience or something like that. But you just have to keep on going. If you fall flat, you stand back up. You fall off the horse, you get back on the horse. Because there are two choices you can make. Well, there's one choice you can make that is two options, rather, is a better way to say it. You can choose to be proactive, or you can choose to be reactive. And if you choose to be proactive, opportunities will continue to come your way. You just have to, again, be persistent, seek them out. And, if you get rejected from the first 1, 5, 10, 50 jobs, that doesn't mean every job in the world is going to reject you. And plus, over time, you got to keep building your portfolio, right? So, and keep learning, keep building things, keep learning more about how to code, what it is. If you're looking for a specific job, write things that are specific to that code base, right? So if you're looking for a back-end job, maybe start writing PHP and understanding how APIs work, right? It's just the nuances are important, the details, but also you have to keep in mind that there's a culture fit aspect too, because that's something else I've been made extremely aware of, is that a large portion of it is culture, right? So, a lot of companies, my understanding is that you can have pretty decent skills, even bordering on like mediocre in some cases. Not mediocre, but like you don't have to be like an incredibly skilled, multi-talented super developer when you're just starting at a junior dev position. Absolutely not. But even beyond that, if I was hiring someone, and this is true of any job really, but it's especially true in this industry, is my understanding of it. I would rather hire the guy with pretty decent skill who is an excellent culture fit than the ass who is rude to everyone around him and has a superiority complex but can do anything, right? I would much rather take the first guy. He sounds like a lot more fun to hang out with and work alongside and have on my team. So really, it's just about finding the right place, right? You can get rejected and rejected over and over and over, but the second you get a job, you've gotten the job. That's it.
One thing I see a lot of people do is they'll interview and then get discouraged, and then they'll either stop interviewing or they'll just like send their resume out to 25 other companies.
Yeah.
I urge people to consider another step in between those where you reflect on your interview and maybe write some like notes on how you thought it went and what you could do better. Because a lot of times, like maybe you do have the technical chops that they need, or maybe you can prove that you can grow as an engineer, and that's what they're looking for. But something just doesn't work out. When that happens, write down your thoughts on the interview and like be honest. No one's going to read them except you, and then figure out what you could do to improve the next one. And whenever you go into your next interview, focus on that. It's a little unfortunate, but interviewing itself is an art and like a skill, and like all skills and art forms, it requires practice.
Absolutely. It absolutely does. Even if you're talking to yourself in a mirror, or get one of your friends to mock interview with you. That's extremely helpful. I would also like to mention, as far as interviewing specifically goes, and this is a very, very important thing I find. If you get let's say you apply for 10 jobs, right? And you get rejected from all 10 jobs. You apply for job number 11 and it seems like it's going a lot better, right? But something feels off about it. But maybe they extend an offer to you. Don't necessarily take a job just because it's a job. I mean, maybe for your first one, it's a little more acceptable and understandable to do so. But I guess what I'm kind of getting at is in your interview specifically, the interview is not just them interviewing you, it's you interviewing them. You've got to ask questions. You've got to ask about what they do. You've got to ask about what their culture's like. You've got to ask, at the very end, I always make sure to, I think I ask more, historically, I think I've asked more interviewers questions than they've asked me. And at the end, you've always got to say, you don't have to, but I always make sure to say something along the lines of, look, is there, any information that I left out that you need from me? Do you have any other questions for me? Is there anything I can clarify for you? Is there anything else that you think would be beneficial? Do you have any concerns about me as an employee? Is there anything that you would say would need more or less of, or do you see any problems further down the road? But you've also got to ask about the company, and it's also important to research the company before you go into it. You have to go in informed, confident, and ready to grill these people as hard as they're going to grill you. That's because that's it. You're interviewing them for a position that you're going to be stuck in for X number of hours a week. Um, Being around them all the time, you want to make sure it's a good fit for you too. That is that is just as important, if not more so. So make sure you ask your interviewer questions too. There are tons of great articles and resources out and about that I personally have compiled. I have a list of questions that I have printed out, and I take it with me alongside my resume to every interview that I have, especially in software development and the tech industry. I take it to every interview, and I go through the list. And I have them conversationally, chronologically ordered and everything, and I'll go through the whole thing because I want to know their thoughts. I want to know what makes their company work. I want to know if this company has any problems, or one of the biggest things I ask that always gets you ever watch Hot Ones, and the guest will be like, Sean Evans, how do you even know that about me? It's always really kind of rewarding in its own way to see the look on interviewers' faces when you ask them what are the biggest challenges that this company currently faces. Because a lot of interviewers, they'll take time and think about it, and you'll see this puzzled look on their face because nobody asks that. You know, it's not about the shock factor. You do genuinely want to know that, but it's about really getting in there and understanding what you would potentially be getting yourself into. So not only do you have to have that confidence going in, but you also have to make sure that you know exactly what the result is going to be. Don't go into an interview assuming, oh, you've got this, I'm definitely getting this job. Do that for your confidence, but don't do it to the point where if you do get rejected, you'll beat yourself up too hard over it, because you don't want to do that. Like you were saying, Brad, you can, if you have one interview that you fail and you stop interviewing, well, guess what? You're definitely not going to get the job because you're not doing interviews, right? Because if you choose, you can choose to be proactive or reactive. And if you choose to be reactive, yeah, you've still made a choice. You know, in the words of Geddy Lee in Rush, if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice, man. And and if you choose to do that, then yeah, nothing's going to happen because you've chosen to stop. So you have to keep going, or else nothing will happen. There's no chance that you 100% will not get an interview if you won't get a job if you don't interview. So you have to keep pushing forward, even if it wears you down to the point where you think it's no return, right? But you got to be persistent. I've been rejected plenty of times at this point, but once you get the one job, man, you're in.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice overall. I would just amend one of the things that you said earlier about like everyone's financial situations are a little different. So if you get an offer and it feels a little off, and if you can hold out and try to find something better, I'd recommend it. But
Sure, yeah.
you got to do what you got to do.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. It's funny because as soon as I said that, I was like, wait a minute, I should have said that differently. No, definitely. Look, and I mean, I got lucky because I now have a job that I do. I love all my coworkers. I really love the environment that I'm in, and it's the first job, so I didn't feel like I was settling, but I did take it. As soon as they were like, "Do you want this job?" I was like, "Yes." um, so yeah, if I may also amend and try to rephrase that, take the job if you need the job, but if there is something better, if there's a better culture fit, and the salaries are you know same ballpark, pretty close, I would take, at this point, I think I would take, if I had two salary options that were like, I don't know, $5,000 apart or something, I'd take the lower one if it was a better work environment.
Yeah, definitely do a cost benefit analysis on like all of your options, and say like, what do I get out of this and at what cost, and figure out which one is
Hmm.
best for you.
Absolutely. But I guess ultimately it's just be persistent.
So, Ethan, if people are interested in following you or your work, where can they do that? Do you have a GitHub or Twitter handle, a personal website, anything like that?
I do have a GitHub. A personal website is something that I still need to create at this point, now that I suppose can. Um, as far as a GitHub goes, you can find me at ETHDMILL, just a concatenation of my name, right? So, yeah, ETHDMILL is going to be my GitHub. I don't really use Twitter so much anymore, so I wouldn't even worry about that one. But GitHub's going to be the best place to go.
Awesome. Well, I think that wraps it up for this episode of the Design Doc podcast. Thanks for your time today, Ethan.
Absolutely. Thank you as well. It was great to be here. I appreciate the opportunity.
If you're interested in following your host, you can do so on Twitter by following at Brad Cypert. That's BradCypert. You can find me under the same username on GitHub or join my mailing list at bradcypert.com. As always, you can find the Design Doc anywhere that podcasts can be heard. Oh, and just a reminder, if you have a question that you'd like to ask on an episode of Design Doc, you can go to anchor.fm/design doc. That's anchor.fm/design-doc and record and submit your own questions to be featured in a future episode. Thanks for tuning in.